What happens if your mic's closer to you?
Sound good?
It actually sounds a lot cleaner.
It looks hilarious to see it just kind of like walk into the screen.
I know, it's like... So episode 10, is that what this is?
Hey guys, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 10, and we've got our very special guest here, our good friend Corey. How you doing, Corey?
I'm well. How are you guys?
Good, man. You sound real sexy on the microphone there. So
yeah.
With what's all going on, there's already derailing. It's
start over.
It's funny. It's fine. All right, here we go.
Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 10, Why Dog Training is Important. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. This is episode 10. I'm Mariano, that's Brent, and we've got our good friend Corey with us as a special guest. How you doing, bud?
I'm well. How are you guys?
Good. Still sounding sexy. I don't know what it is. But today, we are going to be discussing something that's been a very prominent topic since, there are lots of good people out there who understand this need with the whole virus and, rescues and shelters being shut down. And a lot of people are considering rescuing or fostering dogs. And while that's great, and we definitely encourage people to do it, there are certain things that we want you guys to be aware of and look out for. So where do we begin?
Cool. I guess a couple things that I really want to make relevant for people that as dog trainers, we get very similar calls all the time, and we're so happy to have our special guest Corey Chavez on because he'll be able to give us his take on the rescue game, on rescue dogs, on all these things. But what we start seeing with this COVID-19 lockdown, our dogs are having so much FaceTime with us now. That my biggest fear, my biggest worry is how are the dogs going to be when life goes back to normal, right? Or goes back to that new normal. So many times with rescue dogs, we see separation anxiety, we see overprotection, we see codependency, we see isolation distress, and we see dogs who at a very young age may or may not have, had a loving family. So sometimes when people are rescuing or fostering for the first time and giving these dogs the attention that they require and that they need, is sometimes the dogs, what I like to say is they fall in love. Right? And when they fall in love, it's puppy love, right? To its fullest. And if you guys remember having puppy love, very emotional, very strong, but not necessarily always the healthiest, at least in my perspective. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Corey, you want to your first time on the podcast, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Corey. I've been training dogs for about 10 years now. Brent and I have known each other pretty much that entire time, 10 years.
Very good friends.
Yeah, we used to train at the same facility. So yeah, we've gone down the same path, similar paths. Mm-hmm. And then we branched off a little while ago, a few years ago. And we, just like him and Mariano, kind of started our own businesses. And so now I'm going into my third year, my own business, and working with a lot of rescues now. Most of my dogs, I would say 80% of the dogs I work with are rescue dogs. Mm. So yes, I have a lot of experience now with that. But so anyways, I spent, 7 years learning and working alongside you and our mentors and learning to train dogs at the facility. I know you guys have brought that up already in one of your episodes where you guys came from. So yeah, I was there at Canines Only with you. I guess backtrack a little. I had to learn how to train my own dog when I was 18 years old, kind of that same, right? Everybody's kind of the same when it comes to, I became a dog trainer because I needed to train my own dog. Same thing.
Yeah,
same thing. Cool. Well, I didn't really follow that. I really needed a job when I moved to LA and I had my dog and I had been down the PetSmart,
but it's one of those byproducts. It's like one of those byproducts of just, I happen to have a dog and I'm working with dogs, and we had the mentors to do it. That was great.
Right. Yeah. So just sparked an interest and wanted to continue with it and dove in deep. And as you know, we've dove in deep with it and developed our own understandings and some good skill with dogs. And then now just trying to give that out and educate people and work with them as much as we can and dogs. And that's where I find myself right now is just trying to give as much value as I can to people with, I guess, my expertise and my knowledge that I've gained over the course of this time. And it's ever evolving. right? It's ever evolving. We're continuing. Yeah. Every dog is new. Every owner is new. Every person. So continuing to stack on the experience and then deliver that now. So now I work with a lot of rescue dogs and I guess just every other dog in between, you know, puppy or somebody got the dog from a breeder as well. So so that's I guess where I'm at right now. And we're kind of all experiencing this corona thing right now. And you know, where I agree with you when you're talking about, you know, a lot of anxiety is going to happen or develop right now. Every time I'm talking to somebody, I'm mentioning those same things right now. You know, that I'm a little scared that, you know, when this is sort of over, we're going to be called with a lot of anxiety issues, right? So pretty much everybody I talk to at this point, I'm telling them, oh, you're going to want to do this, or I recommend this, mostly just because that, and that's if they bring up anxiety or not. I'm just foreseeing that to happen based on experience, and whether they bring it up or not. Right.
Right. It's kind of inevitable. We can kind of see that's what's going to happen.
It's funny how that goes, because right as we started talking about that, you know, whenever it was that we originally kind of brought up this like as an idea, I started getting those questions too, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, my dog's doing great with all the stuff we've been working on, but I notice this, you know, and it's like, oh, well, you're home. Make sure that it's okay to ask for space from your dog. Let me ask you guys this, though. When it comes to rescue dogs in particular, do you ever notice, I notice sometimes that there are clients who kind of like create a backstory for a dog. You know, they'll adopt the dog or foster the dog, and, you know, we don't really know much about it. And they're like, I think he was abused because if I like put him in his crate, he freaks out. Or, you know, if my husband comes home, he freaks out.
Almost every time. Yeah. Almost every time. Yeah. Very common, you know, very common for people to justify why the dog is behaving a certain way. Right. It's always a justification.
And that's a good way to put it.
But I understand why, because they're trying to figure it out. Yeah. Right. It's not, and most of the time it's just because they don't understand maybe dogs at a deeper level. Right. Yeah. So I empathize and understand why they do that. So I think that's where, it's our job to sort of come in and say, well, we understand these things are happening, but they may not be happening for the reason that you're thinking. And they're probably not happening for the reason that you're thinking, because everyone just jumps straight to the worst case scenario.
The catastrophe. Yeah.
Right. And those things do happen. We do get dogs from those situations, right? Absolutely.
Breeders, hoarders, you know, fighting rinks. Like, we get dogs from all different, you know, walks of life. However, you know, I am a strong believer, you know, that dogs aren't so much physically abused as they are mentally neglected, right? Their emotional needs, their physical needs, their developmental needs get neglected, right? And a lot of times, you know, when people, I think this isn't a funny subject, but you guys can kind of relate to it. It's like when people say, oh, I just rescued a dog. And I go, oh, really? How old is the dog? They go, 8 weeks old. And I go, okay. So, okay, you rescued a puppy. Great. And then that puppy 2 weeks later is acting shy or weird. And they go, I think the dog was beaten. And in my mind, I'm thinking of this world where I don't get me wrong. I know it exists out there because everything exists, but I'm thinking of this world where there's these, you know, this really scary world where there's these really sweet puppies and people are beating them. Like, I don't see that realistically in my head, right? As a possibility. Like, no one sees a puppy and wants to immediately punch that thing in their face. So in my mind, it's like this idea that small puppies get abused when they're in a very infant stage. It doesn't really happen. However, I do see adolescent dogs, a little bit older dogs, when they're in their nippy and bitey phases. Yeah, these dogs get flung around and bopped and hit and scolded for like super unfair reasons. But anyways, just my little tangent, just to be clear on really, really young infant puppies usually are not abused. However, they are neglected. And sometimes they may not have the proper handling or human socialization that they need at a young age. And we see the results of that all the time as dog trainers.
Yeah, a funny way in which that I noticed the neglect and how it kind of manifests itself into issues is people who get a young puppy, whether or not they believe that the dog was abused, they tend to do this thing to where everybody understands why it's important to socialize your dog. what they don't seem to understand, though, is that doesn't mean every single person who wants to like pick them up and carry them and hug them should be allowed to, because sometimes it can be too much for the dog, you know, and so that ends up being a negative thing where it was meant to be like a positive, you know, in order to teach the dog to be comfortable around people, bikes, whatever the case. So I spend a lot of time talking to people when they have younger puppies, and I tell them, you know, a great thing to do is socialization is key 100%, but socialization with a certain, you know, context to it. You don't just like throw your dog into the hands of every like giant person who wants to play with them. If the dog seems interested, I don't see a problem with it, but sometimes they're just not feeling it. You can see that in a puppy, but because they're puppies, they don't really, it's not obvious. It's not like they're going to like growl, you know, they're just kind of like, oh crap, I'm in this guy's arms again. And just, you know, and then everybody has that same story. Like a month down the line, when the dog's a bit older, it's like, I don't get it. We socialized him. He was great. Then all of a sudden he started growling, you know, it just out of nowhere.
It's like over socialization almost.
Right.
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's going to come with age, right? That's going to come. So sure, your puppy's going to love everybody, and then it's going to get a little bit older, and yeah, you know, hormones are going to kick in. And I mean, obviously, yeah, we're talking, I don't know, a 6, 7, 8-month-old puppy, right? So yeah, not 8 weeks old or 3 months old or 4 months old. But I do think that, well, even my own understanding, my own definition of socialization is sure, I think you can desensitize. So maybe when your puppy's young, yeah, sure, it's going to be held and people are going to hold it. You're going to take it out. It's going to experience those things. But then later, when you start getting to that the growling phase that you're talking about, well, that's no longer with my definition of socialization. That's more learning how to behave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I explain that. So when people, you know, especially with the rescue dogs, they say, oh, we don't know how to socialize them around other dogs, or we don't know how to socialize them around the things that, you know, he's insecure with or whatever. I don't know, cars or skateboards, whatever. Right. And I'm saying, well, it's not really a social, you're not trying to get them to develop relationship with these things. You're just trying to get them to understand that these things aren't bad. Right. So, but that's going to be contingent on what state of mind is your dog in. So if we're talking about an 8-week-old puppy, well, you really don't have much control over that. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an 8-week-old puppy. So therefore it's just desensitizing. Right. But once the dog is older and now you can actually, well, hopefully this is what we teach, is how to have control over dog's state of mind. Well, now you can show that dog how to behave in social setting. And that, to me, is what socialization is about. So it may mean meet people. It may mean meet dogs as a portion of it. But the greater understanding should be that it's for them to learn how to behave in a social setting, social environment.
Right.
And that and the only way that happens is, I think, well, properly, is with strong relationship. So you get this new rescue dog and people want to right away just take that dog out. And they're not ready for that yet. No. And the dogs end up failing, right? They fail. So that's what I see a lot mostly with rescue dogs, is that they get those dogs, and then going back to them, the adopter, the new owner, whatever you want to call them, they're justifying taking the dog out because they think that that's what was lacking in its previous life, right? So now they want to jump straight to that, appeasing that fulfillment of, oh, well, you didn't have this before, so I want you to be able to go to the dog park and have all this freedom, and they're just not ready for all of that yet. So, you know, when we're talking about rescue dogs, like that's one of the biggest things that I've seen, or the most common thing I see, is that put dog in situation that's not ready for that yet. And the owner isn't ready for it either. They don't know how to handle it. And so what ends up happening is then these experiences just keep stacking on top of each other. And then what I think happens, though, is that now the dog loses even more trust. Right. Because, oh, well, I was a little insecure with this in the first place, and then you forced me to be in this, and now I don't really trust you, and I don't really trust the situation, and this is bad as a whole. Right. And so it just it's a revolving circle, and then the dog ends up getting worse. Right.
Yeah, because it ends up being kind of this like an affirmation of what the dog might have been
already thought. I'm scared of the world, and you just confirmed it.
Right. And you were right. Like, the world sucks, and now I have proof, and so I'm gonna, I'm gonna protect myself, which makes total sense. But yeah, I completely agree. I think a big thing with socializing a dog, especially a younger dog, is, I tell people too all the time that socialization, I think, is best when it goes hand in hand with obedience, because even when you're socializing, like what I was talking about was like when people kind of are overbearing to a dog, because if a person's like giant and a puppy's typically small, there's this scary look of like, when you're giant picking up this little puppy. So there is that moment of like, whoa, whereas there's so much like power in letting the dog, like if the dog wants to go and play, then that's one thing,
Yeah.
But in terms of like avoiding overhandling the dog, what I tell people is start working your obedience. I understand he's a puppy. He's not going to be great, but if you could do the most basic of stuff, you take him to Starbucks and somebody's like, oh my God, your dog's so cute. Can I pet him? Sure. Hang on 1 sec. Sit. Good. Release. And then now he has this person as a reward. So they're not that scary person invading his space. They're the thing he can earn if he's good. And you try to set up context for people to be good things. And then when the dog gets older, like you were talking about, then of course you have the more realistic, like long-term ideal of, listen, I'm glad you like people, or at the very least, you're not like weary of people, but not everybody necessarily needs to be your friend because we got to go. I just need you to kind of heal and pay attention. And if the time is right, sure. I mean, there's definitely context like dog parks or daycares where you can socialize your dog or go to friends' houses and socialize with people, but it's not necessarily always appropriate. You don't shake hands with everybody you see on the street. I think that's something that you told me, Brent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's true. I really like hearing your guys' opinions because it's like, I know we come from a similar background, but then many years we've been separated.
Yeah, but we're all different.
Yeah, we're all different, but it's crazy how three people who think differently, who our goal is the same. We want to help as many dogs as we want, but we can all come together and have, we're preaching the good word of dog training, which is great. My definition of socialization has always had 3 parts to it, right? And the first part is exposure, right? So that's kind of where desensitization happens, right? And we know as dog trainers, and those people who are listening, young dog trainers or dog lovers, there are windows that close in puppyhood for certain exposures, right? So, if a dog under the age of 18 weeks is not socialized heavily with other dogs and humans, the likelihood of that dog in adulthood showing aversion to men, children, and strangers is a lot higher, right? But if under 18 weeks, we start seeing that those dogs are exposed to the world, to noises, to other dogs, to other people, on a regular basis, that they're actually going to start adjusting and adapting to that environment, right? Mm-hmm. The second part of socialization to me has always been teaching how to interact, right? Teaching how to interact. So be it interact with a human, if it's biting, do I jump on humans? Do I jump on dogs? Do I bite dogs? Do I chase dogs? Do I grab their legs? Do I grab their necks? How do I do it? Right. So, luckily dogs help each other learn that stuff, especially if you have an older dog with a younger dog, they can kind of coach each other through that. But definitely the hardest part is teaching puppies how to interact with humans. I think that's always the hardest one. Right. Mm-hmm. And then the third part is context and conduct. Right. So this is where what we're training the dog to be and what we're training the dog to do changes. Right. If I want a house pet, or do I want a working dog, or do I want a service dog, or do I want a therapy dog? The context changes of how the dog should conduct themselves, right? Do I want a dog who is perfectly obedient and constantly deferring to the owner, or do I want a dog with a little personality who's goofy and interacts but just doesn't bite the kids, right? And all of these 3 things, even though they're very different, but they're also similar because they kind of bleed into each other as the dog gets older. The more we expose the dog, the more we can teach them to interact with things. And the more consistent places and context that we give the dog, the more that they can start generalizing. This is how I have to act, at daycare. This is how I have to act at the dog park. This is how I have to act at grandma's house, right? And we give the dog different contexts. And the dogs, it's so crazy to see how dogs from environment to environment can just learn to switch, their behavior. So it's really cool. Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.